Good evening to you, or good afternoon to you, Central Georgia. Thanks for tuning in here for a look at your extended forecast. Have a bit of an active weekend to go over, but as we roll into this first weekend of 2026, we're going to go ahead and take a little bit of a year in review recap. But specifically, first and foremost, let's talk about the month of December, because we had our fair share of days that we did record some rain throughout the month of December. In fact, if we count them up real quick here, we had 5 of the first 6 days, and it looks like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 days total in the month of December that we did record some rainfall. Obviously, you see this bit of an outlier right here. This was a day on the 17th of the month that we couldn't record any data. We had a bit of some observation issues. But you can see that there was a steady decline after a very wet start to the month. Well, I guess just a bit wet start to the month of December, but we've seen a steady decline in those rainfall totals. And in fact, over the last about 10 to 11 days of the month, we only recorded rain on one day. That was back on the 29th, and we only recorded about 1/10 of an inch of rain. So your total for the month of December, we didn't quite make it to average after a very promising start. 2.25 inches of rain for the month of December as a whole. Your average stands just over 4 inches of rain, and the record, of course, over 12 inches of rain and about a foot and about a half an inch of rain. We didn't get anywhere close to that number set back just over a decade ago in 2015. So December marked the 4th month in a row that we saw below average numbers, but now we have 100% completion on this graphic for your 2025 rainfall. You can see as a whole, it was a pretty dry year. We were just over 1.5 inches below where we should have been. We got off to a fairly dry start for the first 3 months of the calendar year, and then April, May, and June followed it up with some above average numbers. So we saw plenty of rainfall throughout kind of that tail end of severe weather season during April, May, and going into the early summer. July, we followed it up with a very dry month. In fact, in terms of how much rain we receive on average for a month, July was the driest of any month that we did have throughout 2025. And then we followed it up with a well above average month of August, about 10 inches of rain that we recorded in the month of August. But then it was a very dry stretch to end 2025. September, October, November, and December all below average, and it looks like the driest of these months was September, but November came very close to rivaling those numbers as we only recorded 7/10 of an inch of rainfall. So this is all of the data as of December 31st. We'll go ahead and refresh this graphic as we go into next week and start talking about our average for January and so on. But overall, it was a tally of 4 months that were above average, and of those 4 months, about 3 of them were substantially above average, and that's why our number isn't too far below where it should have been for the entire calendar year. But of course, we did have 8 months out of the entire year that were below average, and that kind of canceled out those very high totals that we saw in August, June, and going back into May. So here's a look at your latest drought monitor that got released as of Tuesday, December 30th. Well, the data was taken as of Tuesday, excuse me. This got released yesterday on January 1st. Here's a look at your drought conditions where everyone's still under moderate drought criteria, and we also do see portions of a severe drought over in our westernmost counties. So I don't believe we saw any change to this graphic. We might have actually seen a little bit of shrinking with some of these areas that were in a severe drought over to the west. But with not much rain anticipated over the next 7 days, we do anticipate many of these conditions to also continue to worsen as we get the release of next week's drought monitor, which will be the second release of 2026. However, the data only taken as of December 30th. So we haven't had any rain since Tuesday, but we do have some shots at rain as we go into the weekend ahead. Here's a look at your high temperatures. December was a tale of 2 different forecasts. We started it off on a very cold note. In fact, the first 9 days of the month of December were all below average with your high temperatures in the 40s and in the 50s. We then finally got a couple of days where we started to get above average on the 12th and the 13th, had another very cold spell for the beginning of the week of the 14th. And then since then, the 17th all the way through the 29th, I believe that's a stretch of about 13 days, all above average. Somewhere in the low to the mid 60s, even our fair share of 70s. And how about this? Christmas Eve, 81 degrees. It was the warmest Christmas Eve on record here in Central Georgia, and it actually blew the record of 77 out of the water completely. But then we matched our record high temperature for Christmas Day at 78 degrees. We've actually done that 3 other years, back in 2015, 2016, and then I do believe we did it at the earliest sometime in the 1980s. So for the month of December as a whole, 14 days below average because we did have this cold spell right before the New Year's holiday. 2 days that we were right on par with average on the 10th and the 14th, indicated by those gray boxes, and 15 days that were above average. So your tally of above average days was slightly above the number of below average days, but all in all, it was kind of a uniform forecast both ways. We had our fair share of cold days. We had our fair share of equally above average days as we went through the month of December. So that was a little recap about the month of December specifically, some of your rainfall totals for 2025 as a whole. So what do we head into weather-wise as we go into 2026? Gloomy second day of 2026, and that's going to be for your Friday forecast. Rain tonight all the way through Saturday. So that is going to start to move in during the late night hours tonight, which we'll talk about. And we'll have some on and off showers, maybe even some storms in the cards as we go into your Saturday afternoon forecast. But then after that rain gets out of here, it's a fairly mild stretch of weather for the next week ahead. We do have signs of our next rainmaker, maybe towards the end of the work week next week. However, it does look like we are going to have a good stretch of some dry and uneventful days in the forecast, and that will help contribute to our next warming trend that we will see. So here's a look around the quad where it is the story of mainly gloomy skies, but some peaks of sunshine. Downtown Dublin right now is actually getting a good glimpse of some of the sunshine, but areas like Warner Robins and Perry not necessarily seeing too much sun. There is a little bit of a peak of some. It looks to be up in downtown Macon. So with these occasional peaks of sunshine, we are continuing to get an increase in your temperatures, even despite not too much sunshine all throughout each and every hour throughout the rest of the morning. Mid and upper 50s. Looks like 57 may be the warmest number we can spot on our temperature map, and that title goes to a handful of areas. Dublin, Vidalia, up to Milledgeville, and all the way up into Forsyth. Still no one has quite made it to the 60-degree mark as of the late morning, early afternoon time frame on Friday. So here's a look at your current temperatures. Substantially colder air up to the north of us, and this is actually going to be situated to the north of a stationary boundary right now. So that makes sense. Areas to the north of the stationary boundary, a little bit drier and a whole lot cooler. Areas farther down to the south, a little bit more humid, and also continuing to hold on to some numbers that are in the 50s. It does look like Texas has been quick to enter a warm spell after the passage of the last cold front, which was a couple of days ago. So their numbers are already in the 60s and also up into the low 70s at the warmest. 72 in Houston, the warmest number that we can spot on this temperature map. Over here in the southeast though, however, Macon sitting at 55 degrees, pretty similar to Montgomery, the exact same temperature as Panama City, and a little bit warmer in areas over to the east and southeast, 59 in Jacksonville and Charleston, and then a 63 going down into Orlando. The winds haven't been too much of a factor throughout the morning hours on Friday, but we will talk about what times throughout this weekend they will be a factor. Now that your temperatures are increasing up into the 50s, they're not posing any impacts to the feels like temperature. That was the case early this morning in a select few spots, maybe just holding on to feels like numbers in the 30s for a little bit longer. So here's a look at the numbers from yesterday. This is as of January 1st. So we started out the morning mighty chilly, 29 degrees, a couple degrees below average, in fact 7 degrees below average for this time of year. But then your afternoon high temperature was the exact opposite. We saw above average numbers after 2 days in a row that we were below average, so 64 for a high temperature. Back 4 years ago, 2022, that was the warmest New Year's Day we've had on record. 82 degrees, which rivals some of those numbers that we did see back on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And taking a look at your precipitation, we didn't have any on the first day of the month and the first day of the new year. So this year departure has refreshed. So now we are simply just under about 1/4 of an inch below where we should be. We've had some rainy New Year's days in history, so that's the reasoning why it is picking up on that all time. So we definitely need some rain to go ahead and bring this number back up to around average, and we do have some of that in store. But first things first, sunrise time, 7:37 a.m. Remember that when I show you the next graphic, and then 5:40 p.m. That was what time your sunset was. And while yesterday was a pretty blistering cold start to the day, it was nowhere near as low as the record low temperature back in 1918 of 17 degrees. But I did mention, go ahead and put that 7:37 a.m. sunrise time in your head, because that's one of our important dates that we do have as the days continue to get longer. That is going to be the latest sunrise time that we do have during standard time. Right now we are in standard time after we fell back sometime in early November. That resulted in the time change in those really early sunsets. We are now in standard time. That was daylight saving time coming to an end. So we will be in standard time all the way until we get into the beginning of March, when our next time change is going to take place. But that's why I have that important date for January 1st. Right now, just over 10 hours of daylight, which is up maybe about 2 or 3 minutes from our shortest day of the calendar year, which was back on December 21st. We had 9 hours and 59 minutes of daylight. On January 25th, so as we progress throughout the next 3 or so weeks, we are going to see not too much change with your sunrise time, but your sunset. That's going to be the first time the sunset returns to the 6 p.m. hour, giving you a more appropriate feel about when it should be getting dark. Once we get past 6 p.m., that sunset is going to get later and later, and it's actually going to be around 6:37 until we get into March 8th. And that's when we do have our next time change. So that's when we are going to spring forward and daylight saving time is going to kick off again. Sunrise actually does get later, so 7:53 a.m., but your sunrise would be around 6:53 without this time change. And your sunset goes all the way back to 7:37 p.m., indicating about just under 12 hours of daylight. So over the next couple of months, you are going to notice a substantial difference in those hours of daylight as we're now progressing into the thick of the winter season, and eventually we'll be flirting with the beginning of spring by the time we roll around to that March 8th date. So your forecast for your Friday, pretty simple, 65 degrees, very similar to what we hit yesterday with a high temperature of 64 degrees. But it is going to be a bit different in the aspect about how it looks outside. There's going to be a lot of gray in the sky from some overcast and gloomy, mostly cloudy skies. However, yesterday we had a high temperature very similar, so it's going to feel virtually the same. However, yesterday was paired up with those clear blue skies, plenty of sunshine, not necessarily the case throughout today. Rain will begin to move in as we go into the nighttime hours. But first things first, let's take a look at your hour-by-hour warm-up, where the Meteogram only has us peaking at around 62 degrees. Now, we may undershoot our high temperature that I do have forecasted, but overall, the general guidance as of lately is the models have not been doing a very good job. They've actually been undershooting what our high temperature was. They did that a whole lot around the Christmas time frame. But I do anticipate some low to mid 60s are going to be your afternoon temperatures before we drop back down into the 50s as we go into the nighttime hours. However, we're not going to see a very substantial cool down as we go into the evening and the nighttime hours. Maybe just some weather that you are going to need some light layering for if you have any plans to, say, go out to dinner with some friends and family to begin the first weekend of the new year. So satellite and radar picture here at the 11 a.m. hour is very gray, but there are some spots where the cloud cover not necessarily as thick in nature, and that's why we see breaks in the cloud cover in areas like downtown Dublin, up here in downtown Macon. The cloud cover is a bit denser in Warner Robins and Perry, and that's why we didn't see any glimpses of sunshine on the walk around the quad. But within this cloud cover, there are your fair share of some light showers in the forecast, really just to the west of Peachtree City, stretching back over into East Alabama, and another cluster just to the south of the I-85 corridor, pretty close to the Auburn area in Alabama. So look at the southeast as a whole, and yes, it's a gloomy atmosphere, but as you can see, the cloud cover not as dense over to the east as it is back over here in areas to the west into Alabama and over into Mississippi, portions of Arkansas and Tennessee. And that is where we are going to see maybe some darker cloud coverage and also your fair share of some scattered light showers, even some pockets of some heavy rain. We are looking at that pattern to creep over to the east as we go throughout today and specifically into tomorrow. So for the rest of today, it's just a story of on and off clouds. It's not going to be completely gray skies all day. You will have your occasional peaks of sunshine, but they are going to be fairly short-lived as we are looking at the cloud cover to continue to build back in from west to east. Then as we go into the nighttime hours tonight, this latest run of Future View has rain maybe making a bit of an earlier entrance than it did, say, as of early on Friday morning. And what that's going to do is maybe have some implications. You may want to have the rain gear ready to go just in case if you have plans to stay out a little bit later into the nighttime hours after going to dinner or doing whatever your Friday night plans do entail. So it's going to mainly be more widely scattered light showers as we go into these nighttime hours, and the rain will continue to be present overnight into the early morning hours tomorrow. Now, I think the best chance at walking out the door tomorrow to seeing some rain is going to be farther to the north. We have seen pretty good agreement amongst FutureView with that, and it's still mainly going to be of showers. Right now, the nighttime rain chances for Friday and the early morning rain chances for Saturday are going to be of the shower variety. And yes, you are going to have your pockets of some heavier, maybe some steadier rain, but areas farther down to the south, they haven't seen as much rain as we go all the way out to 6 a.m. on Saturday morning. We continue to go into the later morning hours on Saturday, 10 a.m. Most of the rain is still located farther up to the north. Areas farther down to the south, the rain is a lot more scattered out in nature. But then as we go into the afternoon and we start to see some occasional peaks of sunshine, that's going to heat the surface, and we are looking to get a bit of an influx in humidity, and that's going to allow for coverage of rain to flare up as we go into that warmest portion of the afternoon tomorrow. And then we start to have the possibility of not only showers, but also a couple of storms, which you will see indicated by some of these darker red colors. Farther over to the right indicates your heavier rainfall rate, and those heavier rainfall rates are going to indicate the potential for some thunderstorms. But that's mainly down to our southernmost counties as we go into the afternoon hours on Saturday. I do believe if you have Saturday afternoon plans and you live up, say, in Jasper County, Jones County, up here in Bibb County, these rain chances are going to taper off a little bit earlier, so you will have a fairly dry Saturday afternoon forecast as opposed to areas like Telfair, Wheeler, Dodge, maybe over into Wilcox County farther down to the south. But whatever pops up in the way of rain, it is going to get out of the picture as we go into the evening hours. Not going to be a continuous washout from sunrise all the way to sunset. You are going to have some breaks in the rain, so it's more of a story of on and off showers and a couple of storms specifically really for south central Georgia and going to be in that afternoon window. So sometime just past lunchtime all the way until we get into sunset. And then as we go into Sunday, this is looking like the best day of the bunch for any outdoor plans you have for the weekend ahead. Starting out mostly sunny, we do have a few clouds in the picture. I wouldn't even doubt that we could have some fog pop up into the picture as we are going to have some moisture at the surface, some of that standing water that is still lingering. And then after that, we get the clearing in any of that cloud cover as we go into the hours after lunchtime on Sunday. Crystal clear skies as we wrap up the weekend. So like I said, I do believe Sunday is going to be the best day for some outdoor plans. Then it looks like maybe some form of a mid-level or upper level frontal boundary does try to cross through, indicated by just some passing clouds, and not going to have as much moisture to work with on the backside of this low pressure system that will be causing a more active weather for Friday night and all throughout Saturday. So we have been outlooked in a level 1 out of 5 risk for maybe seeing a potentially strong or severe storm or two. This is a really kind of cover the bases forecast. Right now, the confidence in severe weather is fairly low, and I do believe it doesn't even really extend this far north, according to what FutureView has remained very consistent on. I do think it's mainly our southernmost counties, but just be aware that there is the potential for maybe a severe thunderstorm warning that could pop up in a select few spots. Not going to be widespread by any means, but that is just going to mean that a few thunderstorms can pack a bit of a punch with some heavy rainfall within those cores of heaviest downpours, and then of course some gusty winds. So that's what I mean by a strong storm or two. It could just get a little bit loud and a little bit messy outside for an occasional maybe 30 minutes or so, and then after that I do believe most of the weather leaves the picture. But it's something we haven't talked about in quite some time, so I want to make sure that you stay aware. And of course, we will be keeping you updated if anything is to pop up in the way of a severe warning over the course of your Saturday. Now we go into your FutureView rainfall graphic, where we go all the way out to Saturday at 11 p.m. Most totals are only going to see maybe about 1/4 of an inch. We might have a select few areas that get upwards to about 1/2 inch or even closer to an inch in total for some rainfall like you do see up here in Sparta. This doesn't mean that Sparta specifically is going to see 1.2 inches of rain, but there will be some isolated pockets in the areas that hold on to the rain a little bit longer. And that overnight time frame from Friday into early on Saturday does look like our northernmost counties hold on to the rain for an extended period of time. But then once we start to get maybe some more active weather, maybe some storms in the forecast farther down to the south, those rainfall rates are going to get heavier and heavier. So you do see some of those darker shades, maybe more so some of the gray and kind of the bluish colors that are indicating some totals up to 1 inch, or even purple areas that are farther up to the north of us indicating some totals above 2 inches. So most areas not really going to get rain that's too beneficial for, say, some of those drought conditions. However, a select few spots are going to luck out a little bit more than others. In terms of the breeze, throughout the rest of your Friday, it is going to occasionally be a tad bit gusty, maybe only up to about 13-14 miles per hour. But then we are going to have some winds in the forecast. Starting early on Saturday morning, some gusts up to 22 miles per hour already possible, and that will continue to be possible, especially farther down to the south as we go into the first part of your Saturday. Then I do anticipate the winds to start to taper off as the frontal boundary that is just to the north of our low pressure system is going to push that out over to the east and the southeast. And there's not going to be too breezy of conditions behind this frontal boundary. It is actually looking like there's not really much of a breeze whatsoever as we go into Sunday afternoon. But a big reason why we do have the potential for maybe some storms in the forecast is going to be this. As we go throughout the rest of today, we continue to have this southerly component to our winds, ushering in a bit more moisture into the forecast. The more moisture you have in the air, the more lifting mechanisms like a low pressure system or a frontal boundary are going to have to work with. So this is a fairly or decently humid atmosphere, I will say. Obviously not as much as areas closer down to the Gulf Coast, but it's kind of a dividing line. You can see where the drier air is present just to the north of the frontal boundary. That will be driving our low pressure system out of the picture. And then you can see that that gets pushed down to the south and the southeast as we go throughout the rest of the day on Saturday and transition into your Sunday morning. So for your weekend outlook, we actually will see some slightly warmer numbers on Saturday afternoon during those peaks of sunshine and that influx of moisture, though those will both be contributing factors to why the numbers are continuing to be above average, even despite the mostly cloudy skies. 30% chance of rain as we go into the nighttime hours on Friday, and then a 60% chance of starting out just shower chances in the morning hours, but then the afternoon does have the potential for a couple rumbles of thunder and of course the flashes of lightning that are going to be prerequisite of that. And then Sunday, once again, the best day of the entire weekend ahead to have any outdoor plans, and slightly cooler. We get the clearing in the cloud cover, so your morning low temperature goes down a bit. But then your afternoon high temperature also going to be a little bit cooler on the backside of that frontal boundary. So the moral of the story is if you have any outdoor plans on Saturday that you can't rearrange, if you can rearrange, number one, making those plans on Sunday is definitely your best bet. However, throughout Saturday, I would just keep the rain gear very handy and, of course, stay up to date if we are to have anything in the way of maybe some stronger to maybe even potentially severe storms pop up into the picture. But now let's transition into the beginning of next week, where we do have on and off cloud cover really throughout each day of the beginning of the first full work week of 2026. This is Tuesday at 3 p.m. You will see a few light green dots, maybe light blue dots start to pop up. Not looking at any rain chances besides maybe the occasional spotty sprinkle. And then as we go into Thursday, we finally start to see a next widespread rainmaker take shape over to the west, up to the northwest of us. I do have some rain chances around Thursday, just through a kind of cover the bases 20% on it, just to indicate we have the potential for some rain as early as Thursday. But right now the long range models have a bit of better agreement that that next rainmaker is going to start to arrive as we go into the end of next week, more so on Friday, but still the bulk of the rain is out over to the west of us. We'll continue to fine tune that as the models come into better agreement and as we get closer and closer. In terms of your afternoon high temperatures, above average continues to be the name of the game. So after we ended the month of December on a pretty warm note, yes, we did have that brief cool down as we went into the last couple days of December and the New Year's holiday yesterday, but it is going to be a story of numbers that are scattered about the 60s, low 60s, mid 60s, upper 60s of each of the next 5 days. But it does look like we'd see a bit of a slight cool down in between Saturday into Sunday before no weather systems are really impacting us towards the beginning of next week. And that's going to result in a steady warm up as we climb back close to that 70-degree mark, maybe as early as next Tuesday. Your morning low temperatures tomorrow is going to be the warmest morning of any day that we do have, with a low temperature of 50 degrees. This is because we have more moisture in the forecast and we are going to have more cloud cover in the forecast. But then as skies start to clear out, we do see a brief cool down, 40 down to 38 as we go into the beginning of next week, and then still just slightly above average, somewhere around the 40-degree mark as we roll into next Tuesday. Your 7-day forecast looks like this. It's a bit active for the beginning of it. Rain chances starting tonight, later tonight, and as we go throughout the day, on and off throughout the day on Saturday. So the farther north that you live, those rain chances are going to get out of the forecast a little bit earlier in the afternoon compared to areas farther down to the south, and the potential for some thunderstorms really confined to our southernmost counties during that afternoon window when temperatures are at their warmest. We have the highest moisture content, and then we see that brief cool down into Sunday before that steady climb back up the ladder. 65 into 69 from Monday to Tuesday, and then 71 and 73 as we roll into next Wednesday and Thursday. Kind of on and off cloud cover all throughout the first 3 days of the work week next week. Not looking like anything substantial in the way of rain chances, but then the potential does return as we go into next Thursday and eventually next Friday when it pops up on the 7-day forecast tomorrow. And looking ahead, we're doing a complete refresh on this graphic because what I had on the bottom box as of the last time I updated this graphic was New Year's Eve. So obviously that has passed. We have a whole new set of some holidays and things that we are looking ahead to. Martin Luther King Day. So obviously I know the month of January is going to drag on. January and August are by far the longest 2 months of the calendar year in my personal opinion. But 17 days until we reach that first holiday, and it is going to be 15 days until you reach that first 3-day weekend that you are going to have for 2026. Then the Super Bowl going to be a couple weeks later, just about 3 weeks later, in 37 days. The Super Bowl date going to be on February 8th, and I do believe the Super Bowl this year is on NBC. Next year, we will have it on CBS and on 13 WMAZ. Then Valentine's Day, just about a week after the Super Bowl, 43 days until that, and then 2 days after Valentine's Day, maybe another 3-day weekend for you. Valentine's Day is actually going to be on a Saturday, so go ahead and start booking those reservations right now for your special someone, and you are going to have very likely a 3-day weekend to pair it up with. President's Day is a day that many people will be off of work, especially for government employees and maybe some school systems, so that will be occurring in 45 days. So these are kind of the things to look ahead to for the month of January, the month of February. I kind of just go and look at the calendar for some of those important dates about what is pertaining to your particular schedule. If we have anything weather-wise that is going to pop up, then of course I will let you know. Maybe some anniversaries of some of those ice and snowstorms that we have seen in seasons of the past. And of course, as we go into the tail end of January, we will very likely be talking a whole lot about the 1-year anniversary of our big snow event that we did see, which I actually saw the National Weather Service deemed one of the top 5 weather events that we did receive in the central Georgia and really the Peachtree City forecast area. There was obviously your fair share of some severe weather in the form of maybe some tornadoes. We had an EF2 tornado just to the north of us up in Henry County near McDonough. And then we had a straight line windstorm that was up near the Lake Lanier area. But the biggest 2 events last year were both snowstorms that we did have. The first of which only brought us our fair share of some sleet and a good mix. And then the second one, which dumped on buckets and buckets of snow all over us. I believe the anniversary of that will be coming up around the 22nd of January, which is hard to believe. But we'll keep you posted if we do see anything in the way of maybe a potential winter weather system on the horizon as we are heading in to basically the coldest 2 months of the year, January and February. Right now, we are starting off January on a very warm note. Those temperatures aren't near cold enough for anything in the way of some wintry precipitation, but we'll keep you updated about when the next front that brings in some substantially colder air enters the forecast. And then if we are to have another rainmaker while those temperatures are at their coldest behind the frontal boundary like that, then that's of course a system that could prompt some talks about that S word, but we are not going to talk about it whatsoever as of right now. It's pretty smooth sailing after you get through a bit of a messy afternoon tomorrow, but other than that, not too much to talk about weather-wise. We'll continue to keep you updated. We can definitely use the rain as much as we can get, as I showed you those drought conditions that continue to linger from the very dry end of 2025 over into the first part of 2026 now. So thanks for tuning in for a look at your extended forecast. We'll be back on Monday at 11 a.m. I know this was a bit of a different one. Typically on Fridays, I like to look ahead to the weekend, plan out some events, but it's been a while. There were some numbers I wanted to inform you about, so it was more of a day-by-day forecast, especially with this weekend having the most talking points weather-wise. But we'll be back at 11 a.m. on Monday for a look at what's ahead, and of course, stay updated throughout tomorrow, kind of a play-it-by-ear forecast, but make sure you have that rain jacket whenever venturing outside.